For France, Tony Parker is the hero. 4 championship rings, finals MVP, the symbol of the American dream. French edition. But behind this perfect image lies a very different reality. An affair that almost destroyed his marriage with one of the most desired women in Hollywood. His public support for the country criticized teammates who, away from the cameras, describe him as a self-centered player. We are going to retrace Tipeee's journey to discover who he really is when the lights go out. May 17th, 1982, Bruges, Belgium. A baby is born into a family where basketball already runs through the veins. His father, an American professional basketball player. His mother, Pamela Firestone, a Dutch model. Destiny already seemed written. A few months later, the family moves to France. First to Denain in the north, where his father plays professionally, then to Tipeee in Normandy, starting in 1984. It's there, in this region of France, that everything begins. In 1992, Tony is 10 years old. He signs his first license in Fécamp. A skinny kid, too small for his age, faster than his own shadow. He juggles between children's fashion shows and basketball practices. 2 worlds, 1 obsession. The orange ball. Norman clubs pass by. Fécamp, de Villers-Rouen, Mont-Saint-Ouen, and Jean-Baptiste de la Salle. They adjust his schedule because already some sense that he's not like the others. Despite doubts about his small size, his talent is obvious. But some coaches already think he's too confident for his age, almost arrogant. In 1997, at 15 years old, a major decision. He chooses French nationality. He could have chosen the United States through his father, Belgium, or even the Netherlands. That same year, he joins INSEP in Paris, the temple of French sports where champions are forged. And Tony Parker will become more than a champion. He will become a phenomenon. In National 1, he dominates everything. A prodigy point guard who humiliates players 10 years older than him. In 1999, his first professional contract with PSG Racing, at just 17 years old. In 2000, he becomes a starter, playing behind the legend Lawrence Ciara. But Tony is thinking bigger, much bigger. In June 2001, he declares for the NBA draft. He's 19, the San Antonio Spurs select him with the 28th pick. The youngest European ever to join this legendary franchise. At that moment, no one yet realizes what is happening. A kid from Normandy who learned basketball in French municipal gyms has just stepped into the temple of world basketball. At the time, criticizing Tony Parker was almost sacrilegious. It meant criticizing French success itself. French media crowned him a national hero. The perfect French self-made man story. The narrative was too beautiful, too inspiring to dare question it. Tony Parker had become untouchable. Maybe a little too untouchable. Because some people from the beginning had seen something else. Strange behaviors, tensions, harsh words whispered quietly in locker rooms. But no one wanted to hear it. The myth was too beautiful, too inspiring, too necessary. So people looked away, made excuses and minimized it, until the cracks became too big to ignore. And those cracks, we're about to explore them. First, I want to say this. There is already a video of serial shooter on the hidden side of Tony Parker. But in this video, we're not only going to talk about basketball. Anyway, in 2001, Tony Parker joins the French national team. 19 years old, freshly drafted by the Spurs. And according to Mustafa Sonko and Tariq Abdul-Wahad, 2 respected figures in French basketball, he arrives with a problem. A kid, arrogant. He doesn't greet the veterans at practice. He tries to impose NBA tempo immediately, without listening to the leaders. In France, this gets brushed aside. Jealousy, a generational conflict. You get it now. Tony Parker is the NBA little brother France protects at all costs. We're not really gonna drag him for locker room stories, right? But the warning signs are there, and nobody wants to see them. And as early as 2003, Eurobasket, he's the captain of Team France. And the team is legitimately talented, with Boris Diaw, Michael Pietrus, but behind the scenes, it's not pretty. According to several players from that era, Tony says hi to nobody in meetings. The Euro ends with an early exit. The disappointment is massive. And then Tony drops a line, "I can't do everything by myself." A barely disgusted shot at the others. But once again, people excuse it. We move on. 4 years later, Eurobasket 2007. This time, Tony Parker shows up in a position of power. He's coming off an NBA Finals MVP season. He's untouchable. 25 points a game, maybe the best player in the tournament. But everything collapses. Against Slovenia, 31 points. France still loses. Then comes the must-win game against Russia.
Non, raté! Rebond pour Machoutine, faut faire la faute tout de suite. La faute, elle est faite sur Machoutine par Flo Pietrus. Exactement comme contre la Slovénie.
C'est pas vrai! 2 fois de ça, c'est pas vrai!
France is eliminated. For the first time, the blame points straight at him. September 2007, on Canal Plus, George Eddy, a TV analyst and former player, calls Tony out for a missed decisive free throw. And Tony, he snaps, unable to take even the smallest criticism.
Donc on n'a pas le droit de perdre contre des équipes faibles et diminuées comme ça quand on joue une éventuelle place aux Jeux Olympiques, ce qui est quand même le summum pour un sportif.
Je suis pas d'accord avec ce que tu dis. Je suis pas du tout d'accord avec ce que tu dis. Franchement, je suis pas du tout d'accord et moi je défendrai mes coéquipiers. Tout ce que tu as dit à la télé, de ça, moi je suis pas du tout d'accord. Après, tu parles comme si tu avais joué en NBA, que tu avais fait une grande carrière. Moi je suis pas du tout d'accord avec ce que tu dis.
That clip is going to go viral too. TP is not happy, and for the first time, the crack shows in broad daylight. Had Mustafa Sonko and Tariq Abdul Wahad seen something everyone else chose to ignore? Maybe, maybe not. But those Team France tensions are one thing. With the Spurs, it's a whole different story. Over there, Tony Parker seems liked. He has real friendships in the locker room. Solid bonds, especially with Brent Barry, his fellow guard. A bond so strong that Brent is even there at Tony's wedding in 2007. A friend, a brother in arms, someone you trust. At least that's what Brent believed. November 2004, San Antonio Spurs locker room. Tony Parker, 22, meets Eva Longoria, 35. At that time, Eva Longoria is the star of Desperate Housewives, at the peak of her fame. It's love at first sight. 2 years of a perfect romance, red carpets, magazine covers, a modern fairy tale. On July 7, 2007, they get married. First a civil ceremony in Paris, then a religious one at Château de Valery, with about 100 guests. Among them, Brent Barry. Brent joins the Spurs in 2004. The same year, Tony met Eva, an elite shooter, champion in 2005 and 2007, alongside Tony Parker. Off the court, the two couples become inseparable. Shared birthdays, dinners, outings, friendly group texts, the classic Spurs extended family vibe, where everyone moves like real close friends. Brent retires in 2008 and becomes an NBA TV analyst. But even then, something is already off. In the summer of 2010, Eva Longoria finds messages on Tony's phone. A lot of messages. According to some sources, hundreds, maybe even more than 1,000, with Erin Barry, Brent's wife. The same woman Eva had shared birthdays and secrets with. The wife of his teammate, his friend, the man who was at his wedding just 3 years earlier. After that, you can guess what happens. Erin and Brent get divorced. Tony downplays it, saying it was flirting and nothing physical. According to some rumors, the Barrys were already separated. Erin also denies any physical relationship, but it doesn't matter. On November 17, 2010, Eva publicly announces the split. On January 28, 2011, Tony Parker and Eva Longoria officially divorce in Texas. 3.5 years after their fairy tale wedding, the media story is over. But with the Spurs, it's a whole different reality. Teammates start avoiding Tony. In a franchise built on loyalty and unity, Tony becomes a ghost. Even his coach, Greg Popovich, refuses to speak to him for several days. To him, it's a double betrayal. The marriage, and even more, the locker room. The Spurs are a family, and Parker just broke that sacred code. The front office wants to trade him immediately. If we could have, we would have traded him on the spot, a member of management will say later. The problem is no team wants the media risk. And at that point, Tony has just signed a 4-year, $50 million extension, 1 week before it all blows up. So he stays, but not by choice. Steven Jackson, a former teammate, will say nobody respected TP anymore. Even Popovich wanted him gone. Before all of this, Brent Barry had already been approached in 2009 for a job on the Spurs staff, and he turned it down. he finally accepts in 2018, the year Tony Parker leaves. A Forbes poll in 2011 ranks Tony as the 4th most disliked player in the United States. On the court, he still wins, but behind the scenes, something breaks. You'd think that kind of shock would change him. That betrayal, isolation, and the public fall would teach him something. But the years that follow show the opposite, because the arrogant kid who didn't greet the vets in 2001 becomes the veteran who refuses to pass anything down. May 2017, NBA playoffs, Western Conference Finals. Tony Parker tears his quad, a serious injury that keeps him out for 8 months. Kawhi Leonard, the Spurs' new star, also injures his quad. Not as severe as Tony's, but a complicated tendon issue, hard to diagnose. So in 2017-2018, Tony comes back after 8 months and plays through pain. He forces it. And above all, he fights to get his spot back. Kawhi, on the other hand, plays only 9 games before shutting it down again. The Spurs medical staff clears him to play. But Kawhi doesn't feel ready. So he goes to his own doctors. And his camp straight up disputes the team diagnosis. Communication basically disappears. Kawhi stops showing up to games. Greg Popovich, clearly frustrated, eventually says,
"You'll have to ask Kawhi and his group that question. So far they say that he's not ready to go."
The locker room doesn't understand. So on March 17, 2018, there's a team meeting. Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili confront Kawhi because they want answers. Why the silence? Why refuse when the doctors say you can play? Kawhi stays quiet. According to ESPN, he's disconnected, and his camp already accuses the Spurs of alienating him. From Tony's perspective, you can understand it. It makes no sense, because he played through pain. He came back. And that's when in March 2018, Tony says this publicly: "My quad injury was 100 times worse than yours, but I played." In Kawhi's camp, that line hits like a bomb. And later, some will say it was the last straw. So in June 2018, Kawhi requests a trade and leaves San Antonio for Toronto. In June 2019, he wins the NBA title with Toronto and becomes Finals MVP. Is it Tony Parker's fault that Kawhi left? That might be unfair to say, but the damage was already done. And Kawhi Leonard isn't the only player Tony Parker had problems with. The second one is Dejounte Murray. In 2016, the Spurs draft him 29th overall. He's a young, fast point guard, clearly the future of the franchise. At first, Tony plays the mentor, but the relationship quickly turns cold because, according to people close to them, Tony imposes his style without really handing anything over. In 2017-2018, when Tony gets injured, Murray becomes the starter, and he shines. 13.9 points, 5.7 assists per game. But when Tony comes back, he wants his role back, and he even takes indirect shots. The young guys aren't ready. So early 2018, Popovich makes a decision. He drops Tony to third string point guard because Murray is the future. So Greg Popovich offers Tony Parker a new role, mentor, guiding the young guys after 17 years of loyalty and 4 titles together. Parker's answer? "I don't want to be an assistant coach in uniform." He straight up refuses. On July 5th, 2018, he signs with Charlotte for 2 years and $10 million as Kemba Walker's backup, around 15 minutes per game. He leaves San Antonio after 17 years. And honestly, the pattern stays the same. With Kawhi, he judges the injury situation instead of trying to understand it. With Murray, he refuses to let go instead of passing it down. The bottom line, the arrogant kid who wouldn't greet the vets became the veteran who refuses to pass the torch. And all of that raises a real question. At what point does a player become a burden in his own locker room? How do you assert yourself without crushing others and without burning your coach? I put a guide in the description for anyone who plays basketball, but up to now, we've talked about locker room tension, ego, leadership issues, things that deep down still come back to the court, the game, the competition. But what we've seen so far is nothing compared to what's coming next. Because off the court, far from the NBA spotlight, Tony Parker racks up controversies, and there, the resume won't be able to protect him anymore. June 2012, WIP nightclub in New York. Tony Parker spends a night in this trendy Manhattan club where the vibe is already explosive because Chris Brown and Drake are there. And there's tension around Rihanna. A fight breaks out. Bottles start flying everywhere. And Parker, who has nothing to do with the conflict, ends up in the wrong place at the wrong time. A shard of glass hits his right eyeball, a serious injury that requires surgery and keeps him from properly preparing for the London Olympics coming up. France would finish 5th, by the way. Despite the pain, Tony plays in the Olympics in July. But 6 months later in December, he files a lawsuit against the nightclub for serious security negligence. The amount he's asking for? $20 million. For an incident where he wasn't even the target, where he was basically just an unwilling bystander to a fight between two music stars. The media mocks the extreme victim angle, the absurd amount of money for collateral damage. The image of the stoic champion built in the Spurs discipline takes a hit. You could say it was a one-off, but the years that follow suggest something else. In 2020, Parker buys in and becomes president of ASVEL, his hometown club. On paper, it's beautiful. The NBA legend coming back to invest in French basketball, and of course put his club on the international map. But in reality, the management turns chaotic. Recurring debt despite EuroLeague-level ambitions, risky transfers, messy communication, questionable strategic decisions. Between 2020 and 2025, the criticism piles up behind the scenes. An ambitious businessman, but clearly overwhelmed by his own commitments. And then there's the show Qui veut être mon associé on M6, which ends up finishing him off. Basically, it's a show where you come in and pitch your project, and if investors like it, they invest in your company. So Tony takes part in this entrepreneurial reality TV show, except one candidate publicly accuses him of promising 200,000 euros on air, then cutting all contact without even informing her. Tony defends himself by saying a lot of things were unclear. And after due diligence with Marc Simoncini, they didn't do the deal. But a Radio France investigation reveals that about 10 other candidates complained about the exact same thing. Promises not kept, endless delays, investments that never actually happened. What should have been a showcase of his expertise becomes a symbol of unreliability. But that's clearly not even the worst part, because in July 2024, in the middle of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, 9 months after October 7, 2023, Tony Parker travels to Israel to validate a preseason friendly tournament between ASVEL and Tel Aviv club. He even says publicly, "I'm very happy to be in Israel. I wanted to show my support. I wasn't afraid to come to Tel Aviv." And yeah, that wasn't very smart, because immediately he gets hit with petitions. Accusations of complicity with what's happening in Gaza, calls for a boycott like EuroLeague did with Russian teams after the invasion of Ukraine. So in September 2024, under massive public pressure, ASVEL pulls out of the tournament without really giving detailed explanations. A quick backpedal that shows how little the original decision seemed thought through. But even when it comes to the Spurs, there are controversies. In November 2024, Greg Popovich suffers a stroke. Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili are immediately there in person. They embody that unbreakable loyalty of the Spurs family. Tony Parker, based in France and consumed by his responsibilities with ASVEL, is absent. He pays tribute verbally to his spiritual father, probably sincerely. But after 17 years of loyalty to the Spurs, Duncan and Ginobili put the human bond ahead of their schedule. Tony Parker clearly did not. Now, I think it's a bit unfair to judge him on that because we don't know his life. That's my personal take. So yeah, when you're on the court winning titles, the sports aura protects you. Talent excuses you, the media looks away. But when the court disappears, when there are no more rings to chase, all that's left is the man. And that man piles up controversies, bad decisions, promises not kept. But deep down, do all these controversies change anything? Are you going to stop recognizing his resume? Of course not. 4 championship rings, finals MVP, the greatest French basketball player of all time. That part stays. Because when we talk basketball, maybe the rest doesn't matter as much. We remember the titles, the performances, the glory moments, not necessarily the man behind them. And it's kind of sad when you think about it. People take what suits them, but that raises another question. To reach that level, aren't you forced to be a little selfish? Isn't it exactly that oversized ego, that obsession with yourself that pushes you to the top? Maybe Tony Parker would have never been Tony Parker without it. Maybe that's the price you pay to become a legend. I'll let you judge. And if you enjoy this video, subscribe because 94% of you aren't subscribed. And click this video if you want to see the story of Ja Morant's downfall.